Mishpachah. Welcome to another GoyaGroup.com video. We make these videos to provide source information to those seeking truth, so that all believers and followers of Yahweh Elohim may come to one accord based in truth. Yahweh Elohim is a designation of the mighty one or deity of Yashra'al, who is ancient Israel, of which the Bible is derived. As always, we have restored the name of the Father Yahuwah from the inserted title Lord, and the designation of power to all or Elohim from the inserted title God. Yahuwah is the tetragrammaton or four abreed or Hebrew letters of Yud, He, Uau, He that appears almost 7,000 times in the Torah Tanakh, or the Hebrew version of the Old Testament. This is a three-part video series that will be on the validity of the New Testament. Is the New Testament presented by the Catholic Church true? Is it useful? Is it even scripture? The short answer is no. The New Testament, or NT as we will designate it in this series, is a mythicized version of the real historical events that occurred during the 1st century CE in Palestine. We have already broken this study up into parts A, B, and C, and we apologize that part C will have to be further broken down into 3 subsections for the sake of time, as this would be a 4-hour video. We have instead made part C into 3 sections of about 1 hour and 20 minutes each. This is part 2 of the series, Is the New Testament True? And this is section C of Paul and the Herodians, the truth of Paul's travels in Palestine. This is subsection 1, the historical setting for Paul's first visit to Palestine. For a quick recap to bring us up to speed and to anyone else who may be joining us from this video. In section A, we showed how the Idumi or Idumeans, who were the scriptural Edomites, slipped into the priesthood of Yashra'al or ancient Israel, and they took over the entire kingdom with the help of their benefactors, the Romans, through an aristocracy. We also showed that Paul of Tarsus displayed many of the traits of a particular family of Idumeans who were called the Herodians, which included his Roman citizenship, his wealth, his lineage from the Pharisees, and his ability to call on the help of the Roman emperor when in need. We ended part 2A briefly discussing the Essenes, and them being the only ethnically Yashra'ali or racially Israelite camp of the 3 philosophies or sects. So out of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes, who were the 3 philosophies in Palestine during the 1st century CE, the only one of them that was ethnically Yashra'al or were actually Israelites by blood were the Essenes. In section B, we showed that the Old Testaments or Torah Tanakhs, Nazarim or Nazarites, who were also identified by the Hellenized Nazareans, were a sect or camp of the 1st century and not a geographical location. All verses pointing to Nazareth being a place are just Roman church propaganda. This was a group. These Nazarenes were a sect that arose out of the former Essenes, which started at the time of Yochanan and Mercer, who was John the Baptist in contemporary terms. Also, this was the particular sect or camp that HaMashiach belonged to, and it included all his followers, and especially his nuclear family, who were leaders in it. By the time this group became known as the Ebionites, or the Abionim in Hebrew, around the destruction of the temple, they came to totally rejecting all the teachings from Paul of Tarsus. This was after an escalation of conflicts between Paul and the Nazarenes over doctrinal differences sometime in the mid-50s of the Common Era. We compared the historical accounts of Paul of Tarsus, which seemed to be historically accurate, yet doctrinally wrong, with the historical component of the NT, which is Ha-Sephar Ma'asim, or the Book of Acts. And we revealed that book to be historically inaccurate with some doctrinal truth. And we will continue with that theme in this section. We ended section B touching on the fact that Paul was not only an Idumean, but was of the royal house called the Herodians. In this final section of part 2 of this video series, we will track down the movements of Paul of Tarsus and separate the historical fact from the NT fiction. We will be using the same dating metaphor of the 4 historical strata from section A of this video. We will also use the same citation system of section A. If you have no idea what these are, please watch the first 5 minutes of section A of this video. We will also provide primary sources, which are first-hand accounts of events, as well as secondary sources, which are scholarly sources commenting on the topic of primary sources. Since this section is all about the historical account of Saul or Paul of Tarsus versus the NT non-historical account, we must set the historical setting in Palestine to calibrate the text. But before we do, we will first address a point that we stated that we would from section A of this video series: Paul's Benjamite or Benjamite heritage. We showed that the Herodians, who were obviously Idumeans or Edomites, were clearly identified as Yehudi, as in the case of Drusilla in Acts 24, verse 24. We also showed that Paul was wealthy like them, called for help from Caesar when in trouble like them, was a Roman citizen from birth like them, and was close friends with various Herodians in general. None of that addresses the fact that Paul clearly states that he is a Yashraali or an Israelite, though. He claimed that he was a pure-blooded Yashraali from the tribe of Benjamin. So we will address that first and foremost. In the War Scroll 1QM 4Q 491 through 496, which was within the DSS or Dead Sea Scrolls found at Qumran, the term Benjami or Benjamite was used for overseas Yehudi or those of the diaspora in the 1st century, which is also repeated in some rabbinical literature. But more to the point, we will inspect what the Torah Tanakh gives us about the lineage of that particular tribe. Benjamin was a tribe that was absorbed into the southern kingdom due to conflicts with the other tribes and the loss of their numbers. In Shupatim or Judges chapter 20, the tribe of Benjamin or Benjamin raped and murdered the wife of a Lewi or Levite. This led to the other tribes of Yashraal going to war with that one tribe and almost totally eradicating it. They were then rebuilt through evil means. This is reflected in Sefer Shupatim or the book of Judges, however you want to say that. Chapter 21, verse 6. And the children of Yashraal repented them for Benjamin, their brother, and said, there is one tribe cut off from Yashraal this day. The tribe of Benjamin or Benjamin was gone as it had existed prior to this point in history. The men of that tribe were all but wiped out to 600 men by Yashraal. This is evidenced earlier in the text in chapter 20, verse 47. But 600 men turned and fled to the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and abode in the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. Although Yashraal felt bad for destroying their brother, that tribe, they could not give their daughters to those 600 men because they all made an oath not to aid in its survival by not giving their daughters to them. Sefer Shupatim or Book of Judges 21:1. Now the men of Yashraal had sworn in Mizpah, saying, there shall not any of us give his daughter to Benjamin to wife. The solution to this issue that they came up with was to kill the family of the one tribe that did not come up and make the oath, but preserved their virgin daughters to repopulate the destroyed tribe of Benjamin. Chapter 21, verse 7. What shall we do for wives of them that remain, seeing as we have sworn by Yahweh that we will not give them of our daughters to wives. As shown, there were 600 men of Benjamin remaining, and they needed women, or that tribe would have been completely wiped out. Verse 8, and they said, what one is there of the tribes of Yashra'al that did not come up to Mizpah to Yahweh? And see, none came to the camp from Yabash Gilead to the assembly. For the people were numbered, and see, there were none of the inhabitants of Yabash Gilead there. This was the only house or family of Yashra'al that did not come and make an oath not to give their daughters to the sons of Benjamin. And they knew this because they recorded everyone who came. Continuing in the same book on verse 10. And the congregation sent out there 12,000 of their bravest men, and commanded them, saying, go and smite the inhabitants of Yabash Gilead with the edge of the sword, with the women and the children. And this is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male and every woman who has lain with the man. And they found among the inhabitants of Yabash Gilead 400 young virgins that had known no man by lying with any male. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Yashra'al murdered their own people who did not come to make an oath, and preserved 400 of their surviving virgin women for the 600 men left of Benjamin, which obviously wasn't enough. Therefore, they were repopulated by other means. These other means included later receiving their wives through rape and kidnap, which is totally against Torah and also wicked. Verse 21, and watch and see, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, then you come out of the vineyards where they were hiding, and catch every man his wife of the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. That is kidnapping and rape, straight up, and none of it was sanctioned by Yah. Continuing, verse 22, and it shall be when their fathers or their brothers come to us to complain, which they should do, that we will say to them, favor to them to us for our sakes, because we did not take a wife for any man in battle, neither did give them to the men, so that you would be guilty of your oath. This was totally against the Torah, and was all in the name of keeping some oath that they decided that they would make, that Yahweh never told them to make. And that is how Benjamin was sustained through the period of Judges, where everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This wicked trend of oaths was not unlike the oath that the father made to kill his own daughter in the very same book. This is detailed in Sefer Shufatim, or Book of Judges, however you want to say it, chapter 11. Verse 30 reads, and Yiftah, or Jephthah, however you say that, vowed a vow to Yahweh, and said, if you shall without fail deliver the children of Ammon into my hands, then it shall be that whatever comes forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, surely shall that being belong to Yahweh, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. This man did win his victory, and was first met by his beloved daughter, and yet he still slayed her. Verse 39, and it came to pass at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow which he had vowed, and she knew no man. This guy burned his virgin daughter alive because of a vow he decided to make. This was not of Yah, and is proof that the text gives lessons about unprofitable customs by showing you the end result within it. According to Yahusha, which is reflected in the doctrine of the sect or camp that he belonged to, called the Essenes, Nazarenes, Ebionites, whatever you want to call them, making oaths was evil. Basarah Mattatyahu, which is the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 33 reads, "Again, you have heard that it has been said by them of old time, you shall not swear to yourself, but will perform your oaths to Yahuwah. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is Elohim's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Yerushalayim, or Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your word yes be yes, and your no be no, because whatever is more than these comes from the evil one." This was one of the many innovations or new practices that was occurring during the first century in Palestine. Yahusha and these zealots were abandoning things that were foundational to the establishment Herodian Pharisees and Sadducees, such as oaths and sacrifices. This is congruent with what Josephus relays of that sect or camp, as well as an additional witness. We read this in Josephus's Wars, Book 2, Chapter 8, Section 6, line 135. Chapter 8 is about Archelaus's ethnarchy is reduced into a Roman province, the sedition of Yehuda of Gamala, or Judas of Galilee, and the three sects. All of that information is within chapter 8. On line 135 we read, "They," meaning the Essenes, "are eminent for fidelity." This means they are known for reliability or trustworthiness, "and are the ministers of peace. Whatsoever they say also is firmer than an oath. But swearing is avoided by them, and they esteem it worse than perjury." They see that as being worse than a lie. "For they say that he who cannot be believed without swearing by Elohim is already condemned." Also, make note of the ancestry of Benjamin or Benjamin and its metaphorical connection to Edom or Edom. We read in Sefer Barashith, or the Book of Genesis, however you want to say that, 46:21. "And the sons of Benjamin," which is Benjamin, "were Bala, and Bakar, and Ashbal, and Gara, and Naaman, Ahi, and Rush, and Mupim, and Hupim, and Ard." Bala or Bela is also designated as being the name of the first Adumi or Edomite king. Sefer Barashith 36:32. "And Bala or Bela, the son of Beor, reigned in Adum or Edom, and the name of his city was Dinabah." Beor, the father of this Bala, is also identified as being the father of Balaam. Sefer Bimnabar, or Book of Numbers 24:3. "And he took up his parable and said, Balaam the son of Beor has said, and the man whose eyes are open has said." This all plays right into the Balaam and Belial comparison with the liar and the spouter in the Qumran corpus, which makes these themes overlap to the point where it is a solid wall. The purpose of showing all of this was to illustrate that the tribe of Benjamin or Benjamin was not some established tribe even before the time of the Davidic dynasty, much less 1,000 years later during the events of the 1st century CE Palestine. They were at odds with other tribes from the start, and this continued up to the first king of Yasharal, who was named Shaul, which is the same namesake as Paul before he changed his name after converting some Greek on his journeys. You see, unlike most Yashra'ali, Shaul or Saul changed his name from an Ibrit or Hebrew one to a Hellenized version. There is no other example of anyone else coming into the faith and then becoming more Hellenized. It's just Paul. The NT documents this in Sefer Ma'asim, or the book of Acts 13. Verse 7 reads, which was the deputy of the country, Sergius Paulus, a prudent man, who called for Barnabas, who is Barnabas, and Saul, and desired to hear the word of Elohim. But Elmas, the sorcerer, for so his name is by interpretation, withstood them, seeking to turn away the deputy from the faith. Then Saul, who is also called Paul, filled with Ruach HaKadosh, meaning set apart spirit, set his eyes on him. The first time Shaul or Saul is ever called Paul in the NT is right after he converts this sheriff in Salamis who has that exact same name. This Salamis or Salamis is the same place where our Orthodox Church father Epiphanius was bishop over. Now that we have addressed the Benjamite or Benjamite heritage of Paul, we can get into the setting of Acts narrative in the NT from a historical perspective. Paul only visited Palestine, which is the region that we call Israel today, which was the whole region. He only visited it 3 times in the entire NT account. And we have shown in section B that Paul went through 3 years of initiation and then came to Jerusalem or Jerusalem for the first time in the first of his 3 trips after leaving Damascus and staying with Kepha for 15 days. Paul did this just after the murder of the gospel narratives Stephen and just before the famine started during the time of Thaddeus in 44 CE, and we will prove this in a bit. For the purpose of establishing a timeline, this makes Paul's initiation no later than 42 to 43 CE, just before Thaddeus arrived in 44 CE, and no earlier than after the death of Hamashiach, who died about 38 or 39 CE after Yochanan and Mercer died in 37 to 38 CE that we have already established in section B of this video. We will repeat for clarification. Chronologically, Paul of Tarsus had to join the Nazarenes between about 39 to 43 CE, and it was impossible for him to join in 30 or 33 CE given the historical facts presented within the text. Paul probably joined them around 41 CE at or just after the time that Agrippa I, who was Herod Agrippa I, came to Palestine. As shown in section A of this video, Agrippa I grew up in Rome from about age 6 after his grandfather Herod I killed his own son and Agrippa I's father Aristobulus IV. After the death of the second Roman emperor, which was Tiberius in 37 CE, who had hounded Agrippa I and caused him to flee to the castle in Palestine where Yochanan and Mercer was ultimately beheaded, Agrippa I was given rulership in Palestine in 41 CE after his friend Claudius came to his throne as the Roman emperor, and we suggest that this is when Paul of Tarsus first came to Palestine. The Orthodox Church Fathers record Agrippa I taking power in the sand layer of the historical strata from Eusebius that lived in the late 3rd century to the mid 4th century of the Common Era, or from 263 to 339 CE. We see this in his Ecclesiastical History, which was about after the death of Tiberius, Caius appointed Agrippa king of the Yehudi, having punished Herod with perpetual exile. The Herod there was Antipas. And this reads, Tiberius died after having reigned about 22 years, and Caius succeeded him in the empire. He immediately gave the government of the Yehudi to Agrippa. He means Agrippa I, making him king over the tetrarchies of Philip and Lysanias. In addition to which he bestowed upon him, not long afterward, the tetrarchy of Herod, having punished Herod, the one under whom the Savior suffered, and his wife Herodias with perpetual exile on account of numerous crimes. Josephus is a witness to these facts. Historically, Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, yeah, that was his name, was a member of the Julio-Claudian dynasty that was born on the 1st of August in 10 BCE and died on the 13th of October 54 CE. He was the emperor of Rome from 41 CE until his death in 54 CE, and was the son of Drusus and Antonia Minor. These are the secondary sources, which just for fidelity's sake, just to prove and validate what we're saying here. The point is, Eusebius, who was an Orthodox Church father from the sand layer, used the granite layer Josephus to validate his historical accounts. He records that Agrippa I took over the reign from his friend Caius and was made king. He was given the throne of Herod that killed Hamashiach. So this was all about the same Herod that was involved with the killing of Hamashiach. This Herod that was ruling when Hamashiach, or the Messiah, was tortured, and who was also married to a Herodias, was Herod Antipas. That's this guy right here from the Herodian dynasty. He was married to Herodias. This Herod was tetrarch, or governor, over Galilee from 4 BCE to 39 CE. So you see A is a designation. When the key, you see tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. Perea is that Nabatean, or the Arabian era where that King Aretas was from, which ultimately got Herod Antipas exiled and killed later. So this is the same Herod that also killed Yochanan and Mercer and was at war with that king I just discussed, that we covered well in section B. It was with Herod Agrippa I and his friend Silas when they went to claim Agrippa I's throne in Palestine that Paul of Tarsus tagged along. This is why there's no record of Paul in Palestine prior to that time, and why Paul makes no mention of Palestine prior to him joining the Nazarenes after his revelation until his 3rd trip to Palestine, when he is on trial and about to be killed. Paul wasn't from Palestine, and even the NT narrative confirms this. The NT lists that he is from Tarsus. Tarsus is in Asia Minor. But the reality is that he grew up in Rome with Silas and Agrippa I, and is the reason why Silas is with them in the NT when he informs the centurions that they are all Roman citizens, as shown in section A, and also why Paul is listed as growing up with an unnamed Herod in Acts 13. Sefer Ma'asim, or the book of Acts 13:1. Now there were in the assembly that was at Antioch certain Nabim, or prophets, and teachers, as Barnabas, who was Barnabas, and Shamaun, or Simeon, that was called Niger. Again, Yahusha's brother that we already covered, and Lucius of Cyrene, that's probably Luke, and Manaen, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, or governor, and Saul. Saul, as we already shown, is just Paul in his original name before it was Hellenized. The first verse from Acts 13 tells us that Saul, or Paul, was brought up with a unnamed Herod, who was obviously an Idumea or Idumean, and some other guy called Manaen. Some may try to claim it was just Manaen who was raised up with Herod and not Paul. But keep in mind, there were no commas in the original text, and it would make sense to leave that type of information or statement at the end instead of just before mentioning Paul. It makes no sense to say Manaen, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Paul, especially if there's no commas. You would have said Paul and Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch. That is linguistically sound. Even the conjunction used for the English word and in that passage just before Paul's name is kai, which is Greek's 2532 and means and, even, or also. So that is letting you know that that was in conjunction with Manaen. They're all together. This Herod mentioned here is probably Agrippa I, but it could be Agrippa II. Regardless, both grew up as Herodians in Rome with full Roman citizenship. The reason we favor the identification of Agrippa I is solely historical. Our bias is history, historical truth. Because Agrippa I lived from 11 BCE to 44 CE, whereas Agrippa II lived from 28 CE to 92 CE, and Paul was born in 5 CE. Therefore, in our humble opinion, this places Agrippa II far too long after Paul's birth to have grown up with him. So Agrippa I is more likely the historically accurate choice of the two. Manaheim ben Yahuda, or Manaheim ben Judah, was a leader of the Sicarii and is recorded in Josephus as being the son of an individual named Yehuda Gamala, or Judas the Galilean. There is no date for his life to compare and contrast with the Herods. In Wars 2:17-8, how the war of the Yehudi with the Romans began, and concerning Manaheim. In the meantime, one Manaheim, the son of Yehuda Gamala, or Judas, that was called the Galilean, who was a very cunning sophister, and had formerly reproached the Yehudi under Cyrenius, which is another way of saying Quirinius, that after Elohim they were subject to Romans, took some of the men of note with him, and retired to Masada. This was the Herodian fort, where he broke open King Herod's armory and gave arms not only to his own people, but to other robbers also. So the first point here is that this Manaen that we read in Acts 13:1 is Greek for the Hebrew name Manaheim. This was the same person who was the son of Yehuda Gamala, or Judas the Galilean, that we will go over later. The next point is that he retired to Masada, which was a Herodian fort that housed Herodian families. Manaen, or Manaheim, that was brought up with Herod and Paul, was the leader of the Sicarii, that we will later prove were the Idumeans or Edomites. And this Herod was Agrippa I that came over in 41 CE with Paul and Silas, who grew up with him. They were all Roman citizens who were Herodians and were all foreigners to the region. Paul claims in Acts during his third trip to Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, that he did in fact grow up in the city. But we know for a fact that Agrippa II did not. And yet Paul seemed to have thought that Agrippa II was very knowledgeable in the proper ways of Yashar. This is evidence in Sephar Ma'asim, or the book of Acts 26. Verse 2 reads, I think myself, this is Paul talking, happy, King Agrippa, he's talking to Agrippa II, because I shall make a defense for myself this day before you concerning all the things of which I am accused of the Yehudi, especially because I know you to be an expert in all customs and questions which are among the Yehudi. Therefore, I request you to hear me patiently. My manner of life from my youth, which was at the first among my own nation at Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, know all the Yehudi. Herod Agrippa II was educated and raised at the court of the Emperor Claudius, and at the time of his father, Herod Agrippa I's death in 44 CE, he was only 17 years old. Claudius kept him at Rome and sent Cuspius Fadus as procurator, or like a judge or ruler, of the Roman province of Judea instead. Agrippa II grew up in Rome just like his daddy Agrippa I, and did not come to Palestine until the year 48 CE, when his uncle Herod of Chalcis died. So how could Paul know anything about this guy, especially enough to know that he knew all the customs and the ways of the Yehudi perfectly? It makes no sense unless Paul was in Rome. Paul also says all the Yehudi knew that Paul grew up in Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, but there is not one record of anyone calling Paul a Yashar or Israelite from that time period, or anyone recording him in the region before the 40 CE. Josephus records Saul being in the region in the late 50s to the mid 60s CE, but he never records him there before that. And we will get to that point later when we discuss his third trip to the region. Paul is the only one to state his Yashar heritage over and over and over. And he makes sure you know he isn't a liar over and over and over. If Paul was from the royal family at that time, as we claim, it meant Paul was definitely a Herodian, which also meant he was an Idumee or Idumean, just like Agrippa I and his son Agrippa II. There was great sectarian violence between the various sects or camps during the 40s to 60s in Palestine. This culminated with the temple being destroyed in the year 70 CE by the Romans. But the family and followers of Yahusha, who were the Nazarenes or Ebionites, escaped this calamity by fleeing, as we have already shown in section B. When we look at the setting through the view of one of our granite layer primary sources, Flavius Josephus, these innovators were those who wanted to change things or upset the status quo of the Herodian rule, which he also simply refers to as zealotry. In section B, we displayed that there was 40 years of exile for the Sanhedrin, who were unable to administer capital punishment or sacrifices during that time, that ended in 70 CE with the temple's destruction, which places this halt sometime in 30 CE. That is the same time frame when HaMashiach was teaching in Palestine. This is evident in the gospel account of the execution of HaMashiach, because the whole reason it presents that Pilate and the Romans had to kill him was because the Yehudi lacked the power or authority to do so. Basarah Yakanan, or the Gospel of John, 1831. Then said Pilate to them, meaning the Sanhedrin, You take him and judge him according to your law or your Torah. The Yehudi therefore said to him, it is not lawful for us to put any man to death. Some translations say they had no power to execute them, but it doesn't matter. It all means the same thing. The Sanhedrin did not have the authority to execute people in Palestine during that time. This is why they said it was not lawful to put any man to death when the Torah clearly has examples of capital punishment for certain infractions. They lost their authority because the will of the people were following after the Nazarenes or later the Ebionites. The example of Yahusha stopping a woman from being stoned for adultery is just another witness to this theme clearly. The masses were in support of the zealots and despised the foreign Herodian establishment ruling over them. What occurred was indeed a new covenant that included innovations or new practices not utilized by Yashra'al or ancient Israel as a whole. This new covenant started at the time of the historical HaMashiach began his ministry in the 30 CE until his death in about 38 or so. Another granite layer source for this period will be the Damascus document within the Qumran corpus, which were about the Sadducee or Zadokites, which were the sons of Zedek or righteousness, who were entering into a new covenant, which is further proof of Yahusha historically, as the sect did indeed function under what they believed was a new covenant. This is evidence in the Dead Sea Scrolls Damascus document. Hear now, all you who enter the covenant, and I will unstop your ears concerning the ways of the wicked. It is our opinion that this is the wicked upper priest or the Herodian establishment priesthood, which matches the timeline of the Nazarene new covenant proposed in the NT. This just reinforces that our position that there exists theological truth within the NT, but the history is fabricated. Continuing with the text. From the day of the gathering in of the teacher of the community until the end of all men of war who deserted to the liar, there shall pass about 40 years. The level of congruency between the information is kind of startling. This is the 40-year count of the exiled wicked Herodian Sanhedrin and dates it to the point when the teacher of the community, who in this case is probably Yahusha, started to gather followers and place them into the new covenant until the end of all the men of war, which we will show were the violent Sicarii, who were not the Nazarenes, but were the Idumeans. They were the rebels that were not of the Roman-friendly Herodian line and free from taxes. This 40-year period was from about 30 CE until 70 CE when the temple was destroyed. Those men of war that we will show is definitely the Sicarii, they deserted the liar that we will show is definitely Paul. And they left off from his capitulation with Rome. They got tired of just being subject to Rome because it wasn't working, only to eventually be captured and held prisoner in the city of Yerushalayim or Jerusalem. The document continues and provides real historical proof of HaMashiach and his followers. The Kohanim, meaning the priests, is giving you the definition of what priests are here, are the converts of Yashra'al, who departed from the land of Yahudah. And the Levites are, so it's giving you what the definition of who Lui are, those who joined them, meaning them being the Essenes or Nazarenes. The sons of Zadok or Zadok, meaning the sons of righteousness, are the elect of Yashra'al, the men called by name who shall stand at the end of days. This theme obviously meshes with the NT description of the 12 in the great day witnessed by 2 to 3. Basarah Lucas, or the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, verse 29 reads, "And I," this is Yahusha speaking, "appoint you," he's talking to the 12, "a kingdom, as my Father has appointed to me, that you may eat and drink at my table in the kingdom, and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Yashraal." This is witnessed again in Basarah, Matthew, or the Gospel of Matthew, 19:28. "And Yahusha said to them, Truly I say to you, that you which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his esteem, you also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Yashraal." Let's go ahead and put a third witness in there just to even this thing on out here. Kahazum, or Revelation 21:12. "And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 Shelakim, which is apostles of the Lamb. All 12 Shelakim, or emissaries, or apostles, were firm rocks or foundations of the assembly created by Yahusha, and he was the capstone. There wasn't 13, you know what I'm saying? There wasn't a 13th stone for Paul, so there was only 12. So how could he be a Shuliach or an apostle when there was only 12 who had a specific function and have a specific role in the end times? Even the notion of Kafah being the one and only rock is purely church propaganda. Continuing with the Damascus document. "They were the first men of Kadush, or set apartness, whom Elohim forgave, and who justified the righteousness and condemned the wicked." Again, we're making the designation of the wicked being the Herodians here. "And until the age," meaning the age of the Gentiles, "is completed according to the number of those years, all who enter after them shall do according to that interpretation of the law, or the Torah, in which the first men were instructed, according to the covenant which Elohim made with the forefathers, forgiving their sins, so shall he forgive their sins also. But when the age is completed," meaning again the age of the Gentiles, "according to the number of those years, there shall be no more joining to the house of Yehuda, but each man shall stand on his watchtower." Or basically the law will be written on your hearts, right? "The mill is built, the boundary far removed." These writings are so overtly messianic, it makes you understand why the state of Israel tries so hard to dismiss the DSS today. The reason Christianity rejects the DSS is because it goes against Paul, who is a prominent figure in that religion, and we would argue is the most important figure in that religion. These first men seem to be great candidates for the Shelakim, or the apostles of Yahusha. They received their new covenant from the teacher of the community, Yahusha, and were those described as ruling on the thrones of Yashraal by HaMashiach after the end of the age of the Gentiles. These first men were forgiven their sins without bloodshed, and are the only ones fit to interpret the law, or the Torah, now according to their instruction. And they have the ability to instruct this new remission of sins, this through immersion, of course, and nations would need to come to this group of Yehudi and graft to them to receive this new covenant. These same men of name will sit as rulers in the day of judgment. This grafting in of nations to Yehuda will consist until the end of the age of Gentiles, or the age of Pisces going into the age of Aquarius, when all people will have the instructions directly given to them. All of this language is clearly found in the NT, just all warped and Hellenized. This concept of the exile high priesthood is also reflected in the Habakkuk Pesher document, or the commentaries on Habakkuk as well. The Pesher speaks about the righteous teacher being pursued by the wicked priest who's trying to kill him, and who ultimately does kill him. Commentary on Habakkuk, 1Q PHAB, or 1Q HAB, column 11. He, meaning the wicked priest, pursued after the righteous teacher to swallow or devour him with his venomous anger in his house of exile. The venomous anger language is definitely congruent with the vipers or brood of vipers from the NT and his depiction of the Herodians when they accuse him of being a servant of Shaitan. This is witnessed in Basorah Matithyahu, or the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12. But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, "This fellow," meaning Yahusha, "did not cast out demons, but or except by Beelzebub," meaning the Lord of the Flies, the Prince of Demons. Brood of vipers. How can you, being wicked, Herodians, wicked, come on, speak what is good? Because the mouth speaks from the abundance of the heart. And also, when they went to inspect Yochanan and Mercer's works as a second witness in Basorah Lucas, or the Gospel of Luke 3:7. Then he said to the multitude that came forth to be immersed or baptized, these are the Pharisees that came to him, "O brood of vipers, who has warned you to flee from the wrath to come?" This house of exile that is referenced over and over here is the exile of the Sanhedrin by the Zealots. This is the Canaan ben Canaan, or the sacerdotal family, being exiled to the Canut that we showed you in the previous sections. From this house of exile, the high priest Canaan plotted the death of Yaakov Sadiq, or James the Just. The Sanhedrin, or Sadducees and Pharisees, lost their power in Jerusalem, and the Nazarenes or Ebionites had it, mainly because they controlled the mob. These Nazarene innovators also stopped the sacrifices in Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, which caused more conflict with the Herodian establishment. Josephus records this innovation as a practice of the Essenes, and thus the Nazarenes or Ebionites, as they were one and the same group with different designations during different time periods, as we have already proven over and over, especially in section B. This is recorded in Antiquities 18:15, line 19. This chapter is about how Cyrenius, which was the Quirinius, the taxation in 6 CE, was sent by Caesar to make a taxation of Syria and Yehuda, which we already discussed, and how Coponius was sent to be a procurator of Yehuda. Concerning Yehuda Gamala, which is Judas of Galilee, and concerning the sects that were among the Yehudi. Line 19 reads, "And when they, the Essenes, Nazarenes, Ebionites, whatever your flavor is, when they send what they have dedicated to Elohim into the temple, they do not offer sacrifices." The Nazarenes viewed the priesthood to be polluted, and the Pharisees and Sadducees were nothing more than Roman puppets who were foreigners. The people of Yashra'al wanted change and liberty, and even some of the Idumeans did too. But the majority, and especially the Herodians, liked things just the way they were. This is recorded in Josephus' Wars 2:17-3. This is about how the war of the Yehudi with the Romans began, and concerning Manaheim. Hereupon the men of power got together and conferred with the high priests, as did also the principal of the Pharisees, and thinking all was at stake, and that their calamities were becoming incurable, took counsel what was to be done. Accordingly, they determined to try what they could do with the seditious. Remember, these Nazarenes were, and the Zealots in general, were seditious by words, and assembled the people before the brazen gate, which was the gate of the inner temple, or the court of priests, which looked toward the sunrise. And in the first place, they showed the great indignation they had at this attempt for a revolt, and for their bringing so great a war upon their country. After which they confuted their pretense as unjustifiable, and told them that their forefathers had adorned their temple with, in great part, with donations bestowed on them by foreigners, and had always received what had been presented to them from foreign nations. It goes on, line 413, and they had been so far from rejecting any person's sacrifice, which would be the highest instance of impiety, that they had themselves placed those donations about the temple which were still visible, and had remained there so long a time, that they now did irritate the Romans to take arms against them, and invited them to make war upon them, and brought up novel rules of strange divine worship, he means innovations, and determined to run the hazard of having their city condemned for impiety, while they, meaning the Zealots, would not allow any foreigner but Yehudi only to either sacrifice or to worship in there. It means in the city overall. Line 415 continues, and if such a law should be introduced in the case of a single private person only, he would have indignation at it, as an instance of inhumanity determined against him, while they have no regard to the Romans or to Caesar, and forbid even their oblations to be received also. That, however, they cannot but fear, lest by thus rejecting their, meaning the Roman sacrifices, they shall not be allowed to offer their own, and that this city will lose its principality unless they grow wiser, meaning the Zealots. They got to wisen up here and restore the sacrifices as formerly, and indeed amend the injury they have offered foreigners, before the report of it comes to the ears of those that have been injured. Now, that was a huge, huge bracket of text there, but the gist of it is that the wealthy Herodian establishment couldn't understand why the people were so mad and wanted all these foreigners gone. They gathered a council of these Sadducees and Pharisees, who tried to convince these zealots that were nationalistic innovators that offerings for and from foreigners was totally fine. Although I have yet to see that in Torah, but it may be something from the traditions of the elders or something like that. Because in fact, Yechazak al-Hanabi, or Ezekiel the prophet, is quite clear on this particular topic. Safar Yechazak al, or the book of Ezekiel, chapter 44. And you shall say to the rebellious, indeed, to the house of Yashraal, thus said Yahweh Elohim, O you house of Yashraal, let your hearts be filled with all your abominations. So this is Yahweh talking to Yashraal through one of his set apart Nabim, or his dedicated prophets. He's telling them that they are rebellious, just the same way that, innovations or rebellion was viewed by the Herodians. He's going to give you his definition of rebellion. He also tells them that their hearts are filled with pollutions or abominations. He continues to give his very definition of what that actually means. So you don't have to guess. Verse 7 reads, in that you have brought into my sanctuary foreigners. So there it is right there. He's telling you what the problem is. You're bringing foreigners into this sanctuary. Now, these foreigners are uncircumcised in the heart, which we all understood from Pauline Christianity is, spiritually uncircumcised or whatever. But just in case there's any confusion, he says also, and uncircumcised in the flesh. So you can't just be spiritually circumcised and thinking that you're in the assembly or the kahal. Don't work that way. Not according to Yah. To be in my sanctuary, to pollute it. Indeed, my house, when you offer my bread, the fat and the blood, and they have broken my covenant because of all your abominations. These pollutions are causing them, or cause them, I should say, to break the covenant. So whatever these Herodians were talking about at this Sanhedrin has nothing to do with the prophets or the Torah Tanakh. What we had here was the only sect or camp that was actually Yahudi or Yisrael by birth, rejecting the foreign occupation of their land and their temple. And this is the reason why the multitude was with them and also zealous for the Torah. The people knew exactly what was going on. The zealots had control of the mob and thus the city. And the foreigner Idumeans, or the Herodians, were worried that they were insulting their Roman benefactors and were going to lose their position in that region. Therefore, they got their wealth and their high priesthood together in order to address these zealots directly, who had banned foreigners from the temple altogether, which even included the Herodian king of the Yehudi. And we will get back to that. But this is the scene or the historical setting that Paul arrived into when he got into Palestine. There was much violence going on, and especially against the poor or the Ebionites, which is also reflected within the book of Acts. But it's all watered down and not truly reflecting the historical facts of that time, as this was at its peak, meaning the violence and the destruction was at its peak in the late 50s going into the early 60s, and not at its peak in the early 30s as Acts portrays it. This is witnessed by Sefer Ma'asim, or the book of Acts, chapter 8. And Saul was consenting to his, meaning Stephen's, death. And at that time there was a great persecution against the assembly or kahal, which was at Jerusalem. And they were all scattered about throughout the regions of Yehuda and Shumarum, meaning Judea and Samaria, except the Shelakim, or the apostles. And devout men carried Stephen to his burial and made great lamentation over him. As for Saul, he made havoc of the assembly. This means the assembly of the Nazarenes, entering into every house and hauling men and women, and committed them to prison. This did not occur in the early 30s CE, nor even in the early 40s CE, just before Paul joined the Nazarenes. No, this was from about 58 CE, when Ishmael II was installed by Agrippa II, until the time of Florus in 64 CE. As usual, Acts is generally right about the theology, but is totally wrong about the history. The upper priests, who were the Herodian Sadducees and Pharisees, were robbing the lower priests to the point that some of them actually starved to death. And this is recounted by Josephus. Antiquities 28:8. After what manner upon the death of Claudius, Nero succeeded in the government, as also what barbarous things he did concerning the robbers, murderers, and impostors that arose while Felix and Festus were procurators of Yahudah. About this time, King Agrippa, this means King Agrippa II, gave the high priesthood to Ishmael II, who was son of Phabi. And now arose a sedition or a rebellion between the high priest and the principal men of the multitude of Jerusalem, each of which got them a company of the boldest sort of men, and those that loved innovations. These are the zealots about them, and became leaders to them. This means the Nazarene and the Sicarii. And when they struggled together, they did it by casting reproachful words against one another. So the high priest and the lower priest are at war, by throwing stones also. And there was nobody to reprove them. But these disorders were done after a licentious manner in the city, as if it had no government over it. And such was the impudence and the boldness that had seized on the, meaning the Herodian high priest, that they had the hardiness to send their servants into the threshing floors to take away those tithes that were due to the priest, meaning the lower priest, insomuch that it so fell out that the poorest, meaning the Abionim, sort of the priest, died for want. That's cold. They actually starved them out. This is all before the war and the siege even happened. This is just the Pharisees and the Sadducees mistreating the bloodline of the lower priest Yashraal. We will show by the end of this study that Josephus identifies all those who rebel against the Herodian rule as zealous in general, but he identifies the Sicarii as robbers and assassins, while he sees the Nazarenes or the Essenes as imposters and magicians, or just liars. Historically, this high priest installed is Ishmael II of Phabi, who ruled as the first high priest under Herod Agrippa II from 58 to 62 CE. These are the secondary sources that support this information. It is well recorded. During this period, the wicked priest from the Qumran corpus has robbed the Abionim, or the poor, which were the Ebionites. This is completely evident or made manifest when looking at the commentary on Habakkuk in the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the Qumran corpus. Now, they use Habakkuk, the book that is in the scriptures, and they gave their thoughts on it. And that's what this is all about. So it lets you know at the beginning of this, the passage that was before this refers to the wicked priest. We propose that this wicked priest is none other than Canaan ben Canaan, or Ananias, son of Ananias, that killed the righteous teacher, Yaakov Sadiq, or James the Just. So this is the context that that passage of Habakkuk is referring to. And this is what these people of the Dead Sea Scroll community, or the Qumran community, believed. That he, meaning the wicked priest, will be paid back for what he did to the poor. Remember, the poor is literally Abionim, or Ebionites, in Abrit, or Hebrew. So that's what that actually says. For Lebanon, meaning the Lebanon referred to in the passage, refers to the party of the Yahad. And beasts refers to the simple-hearted of Yehuda who obey the Torah. Keep in mind also, as we've already covered, obey the Torah is Osei ha-Torah. This is where the term Oseins or Essenes was derived from. It continues. Elohim will condemn him, the wicked priest, to utter destruction, just as he planned to destroy what? The Ebionites, or the Abionim, the poor. As for the verse that says, because of the murder in the city and injustice in the land, the city refers to Yerushalayim, or Jerusalem, where the wicked priest committed his abhorrent deeds, defiling or polluting the temple of Elohim. Now, we propose that this abhorrent deeds that he did included the murder of Yaakov Sadiq at the temple. It finishes with, injustice in the land refers to the cities of Yahudah, where he stole the assets of the poor, the Abionim or Ebionites. This is what we literally just read in the account of Josephus. The wicked priest, or Ananias, got together these bold sort of men, and they started robbing the lower priests everywhere, and they totally defiled the temple. We will show by the end of this study that the wicked priest most assuredly got what was coming to him, and that Paul or Saul or whatever you want to call him involved in this robbing or beating of these lower priests with his relative called Costobarus. They were under the direction of the high priesthood that was under the direct control of the sacerdotal Herodian family. Paul and his cousin Costobarus were leading this robbing and beating of this lower priesthood of the principal men of the city that were made leaders. These principal men of the city were Jacob Siddiq, Kepha, and Yochanan, or James, Peter, and John, who we've shown were the three pillars of the assembly in Jerusalem and the Nazarenes in general. Acts introduces Paul to us in chapter 8 as being involved with the murder of someone the book identifies simply as Stephen, who was supposedly a part of the assembly of these Nazarenes or Ebionite zealots, and then Paul robbed homes and arrested people from this assembly of Abionim or Ebionites in Jerusalem. We will get to the truth about this Stephen in a second, but first we will address the filling of the last spot left by Yehuda of Kerioth or Judas Iscariot, because this occurred before the Shabu'ut or Pentecost following the death of HaMashiach at Pesach or Passover, and just prior to the death of this Stephen that Acts introduces. So the Acts narrative begins by informing the reader that just prior to the festival or Shabu'ut or Pentecost, which is also referred to as the Feast of Weeks, and after the ascension of HaMashiach, when he went into the sky, the 11 got together and held an election to see who would fill the vacant position left by Yehuda of Kerioth. They had two choice candidates and used lots to see who would fill this coveted position. This is where Kepha made it clear that in order to be a Shuliach or apostle, one had to have been there from the time of Yahusha's immersion to the point where he was executed. We covered all of this in section A, but that was Acts' definition of a Shuliach or apostle. Everyone else who witnessed the resurrection were not fit to be what we would call an apostle today, according to Acts. That is probably an element of doctrinal truth within the fictional historical Acts. Sefer Maasim, or Book of Acts, chapter 1. It starts in verse 23 when we get to this appointment here. And they, meaning the Shelakim or the apostles, appointed two, Yusuf or Joseph, called Barsabas. Now, I don't know what that is. Does that mean Barnabas? Who knows? Who was surnamed Justus or Siddiq, and Mattathiyahu, which is Matthias. So let's look at our two options here. If we are paying attention, we see that this is a clear troll and an overwrite. Let's go ahead and put aside the fact that they tried to warp the name of Barnabas into Barsabas or some nonsense, and let's look at the surname that they gave to him, Justus, as in the just. That is for Jacob Siddiq or James the Just. This is evident from the sand layer of history. The Orthodox Church Father Jerome or Hieronymus was a Christian and historian that lived from 347 CE to 420 CE. And he read and wrote in Hebrew or Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. It is his translation of most of the OT and NT into Latin, which later became known as the Vulgate. That's this guy. The Latin Vulgate is from him. In his commentaries, we see that even in the late 4th century, Jacob Siddiq was still being known as Justus, which was probably actually the word justice or where it was derived from. Our primary source here is Jerome or Hieronymus, his commentary on Galatians. Line 396 reads, this same Jacob, this means James, who was the first Mabakar or overseer or bishop of Jerusalem and known as, what does it say? Justus. And was considered to be so kadosh or set apart by the people that they earnestly sought to touch the hem of his clothing. Please note that besides the use of the surname Justus, the same adoration of wanting to touch his fringes attributed to his brother Hamashiach was also later attributed to Yaakov Siddiq. This means people considered him to be extremely set apart or kadosh. The other individual that they have here is a Matthias, which is the Greek version of Matthew, which is the English version of the Abrit or Hebrew name Tobi'Yahu, which means gift from Yah. We have already shown in section B that Yusuf bar Nabah is this historical Tobi'Yahu, or Matthew, from our concrete layer sources. This is why you have never heard of the other one listed in the NT before, unless it obviously means that this was Yusuf bar Nabah that is mentioned in the same book. Safar Ma'asim, or Book of Acts 4:36, and Yusuf, they put Joseph there just to hide the fact, but it's actually Yusuf, who by the Shilachim, or the emissaries or apostles, was surnamed Bar Nabah. They have Barnabas, but it's Bar Nabah, which is being interpreted the son of consolation, a Louis or Levite, and of the country of Cyprus. Bar means son in Abrit or Hebrew, and Sabas could be a Hellenized version of the Abrit word Shabbat or oats, but no one could tell you for certain today, and I surely couldn't. Barnabas, or the son of prophecy, is the individual recorded by multiple sources within the Orthodox Church's own records. The Roman Catholic Church has simply written two people that are actually the same person that is vying for the last spot. This is the nonsense that the Romans want you to believe. We will prove that they knew exactly what they were doing too. Continuing in Safar Ma'asim, or the Book of Acts, verse 24. And they prayed and said, You, Master, which knows the hearts of all men, show which of these two you have chosen. That's the language they're using there, saying the Mashiach chose this replacement here. Keep that in mind. Verse 25. That he may take part of this service and office of Shuliach, or apostle, from which Yehuda fell by transgression, that he may go to his own place. And they gave forth their lots, and the lot fell upon Matthias, surprise, Tobi'Yahu, and he was numbered with the 11 Shilachim, or apostles or emissaries. This is just historically senseless. After the death of Hamashiach, the rest of his sect or camp would have obviously looked for new leadership. Acts informs us that this new leader is Yaakov Siddiq later in the narrative, and the NT gives this information with instances of Kafah and even Paul being under his direct authority that we've already shown. Rather than introduce us to that character, not mentioned in any significant way until chapter 12 of Acts, we get an election to fill the last spot of the one who died? What's worse is that Matthias and Yusuf bar Sabas are never mentioned in Acts or the NT again after this point. There is a Yehuda Barsabas that we will discuss later, but that is it for these two. Yet they were so important that a whole chapter was dedicated to them. That seems odd to me. This doesn't seem remotely practical at all, especially considering the reaction of the establishment Herodian priesthood that Acts reveals when they are arresting this sect of Nazarenes all throughout. Remember though, this book isn't about history. This book is the coming out party of Paul of Tarsus. Acts probably just merged the historical truth of the two events of the election of a new leader who was Yaakov Siddiq and the filling of the last spot as a member of the 12 with Yusuf bar Nabah into one little mythicized tale. The Sand Layer Orthodox Church Father Eusebius's Histories basically witnesses against the historicity of Acts with his own historical account. Right after Eusebius provides a weird introduction to this Stephen, then records his death by stoning, he states at the same time the election of Yaakov Siddiq occurred. We find this in Ecclesiastical History 2:1. It's about the course pursued by the Shilachim, or apostles, after the ascension of Mashiach, or Messiah. And there was appointed to the diaconate for the service of the congregation by prayer and the laying of hands of the Shilikim. Approved men, 7 in number, one of whom was Stephen. He first, after the master, was stoned to death at the time of his ordination by the slayers of the master, as if he had been promoted for this very purpose. And thus he was the first to receive the crown, corresponding to his name, which belongs to the martyrs of Mashiach, who are worthy of the meed of victory. He doesn't provide where he got this information about Stephen from, but we will show that this is obvious that he got it from the Catholic NT only, and this individual Stephen is not mentioned anywhere else in the NT prior to Acts 6. But there is a historical Stephen and Josephus that we will get into later. This all just seems like church cover-up to us, but an important note here is that the name Stephen literally means crown. If you recall, the root of Nazari or Nazarite is Nasar, which literally means crown in Hebrew or Hebrew. Continuing, then Yaakov or James, whom the ancients surnamed the Just or Siddiq, on the account of his excellence of his virtue, is recorded to have been the first to be made Mabakar of the assembly of Yerushalayim or Jerusalem. It is funny because Eusebius knows that he has to explain this person, so he's trying to keep as much historical truth as possible while conducting his cover-up. He automatically starts pumping that virgin birth doctrine that was settled on the Nicene Council in 325 CE. This Yaakov or James was called the brother of the master because he was known as a son of Yusuf, and Yusuf was supposed, meaning thought of as, to be the father of Hamashiach, because the virgin being betrothed to him was found with child by Ruach HaKadosh, or the set-apart spirit, before they came together. Now, we continue with the passage we first showed back in section B about the camp of the Nazarenes. But Clement, in the 6th book of his Hypotyposis, writes thus: for they say that Kepha, meaning Peter, and Yaakov, meaning James, and Yachanan, meaning John, after the ascension of our Savior, they mean Yahusha, as if also preferred by our Master, strove not after honor, but chose Yaakov Siddiq Mabakar Yerushalayim, which means James the Just, Bishop of Jerusalem. Eusebius is quoting a 6th book of Clement that we no longer have available to us today. But he uses it for street cred, because everyone knew Clement of Rome knew them personally and was taught directly by Kepha. He not only has the 3 pillars that Paul also recognizes, who were the 3 priest-type leaders found in the Qumran corpus, but also we see they have the language that they chose Yaakov as if it were the master's preference. This is not at all unlike the election of the 11 Shilikim or apostles, whose member, the last member, was chosen by the master that we just read in Acts. This is the same story, it's just the mythologized version of it. As stated, Acts has the theology not too far off, but the history is totally broken. Continuing, but the same writer, meaning Clement, in the 7th book of the same work, relates also the following things concerning him, meaning Yaakov Siddiq. The master, after his resurrection, imparted knowledge to Yaakov Siddiq and to Yachanan and Kepha, and they imparted to the rest of the Shilikim, or the apostles, and the rest of the Shilikim to the 70, of whom Barnabas, that's Barnabas right there, was one. But there were 2 Yaakovs, or Jameses, one called the Just, Siddiq, who was thrown from the pinnacle of the temple and was beaten to death with a club by a fuller, and another who was beheaded. Eusebius quotes Clement to show that he is accurate, but Clement doesn't mention any Stephen in his writings we have today, nor any special secret seven, and he only ever notes the 12 Shilikim, or apostles, and the 70 Talmudim, or taught ones, of which Barnabas was one. That information about Stephen and his secret seven is just from Eusebius, which he only got from the Catholic NT. Furthermore, Eusebius records that Yaakov was martyred by being thrown down and then beaten to death with a club. There's also the record of the other Yaakov, who is the brother of Yachanan, or John, and who was beheaded as mentioned in Acts. We see this in Sefer Maasim, or the book of Acts, chapter 12. Verse 1 reads, "Now about that time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the assembly." He means the Nazarenes or the Ebionites. "And he killed Yaakov, or James, the brother of Yachanan, or John, with the sword." The book of Acts dates itself at several points with real historical events or the names of real Roman rulers of the region. The Catholic Church was able to get away with these historical inconsistencies 2,000 years ago, but it is all but impossible today due to technology and ease of access to information. The time of a king of Herod that killed Yaakov, or James, may not seem like much information, but when in conjunction with other pieces, a timeline is easily calculated. In the previous chapter, we are given a crucial piece of information that helps with this. Sefer Maasim, or the book of Acts 11:26. "And there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Ruach, or the Spirit, that there should be a great drought throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar." Tiberius, Claudius, Caesar, Augustus, Germanicus, them names, I tell you, was born in 10 BCE and ruled 13 years as emperor of Rome until his death from 41 to 54 CE. So this drought had to occur within that time frame, but we will nail it down to a more accurate time frame than that. This alleged prophet, who will later show had to be a false prophet if he's even a real historical person, prophesied a great famine, which was definitely a historical event. This is important in establishing a timeline, and this all relates to the beheading of the individual the NT describes as Yaakov, the brother of Yachanan, who is actually, more likely, the brother of Yahusha, called Yehuda or Jude. We can see this in our granite layer source of Josephus. Antiquities 25:1. This is about concerning Theudius and the sons of Yehuda Gamala, or Judas the Galilean, as also what calamity fell upon the Yehudi on the day of the Passover. Now it came to pass, while Thaddeus was procurator of Judea, that a certain magician, whose name was Theudius, or Thaddeus, persuaded a great part of the people to take their effects with them and follow him to the river Yarden, or the Jordan River. For he told them that he was a prophet, and that he would, by his own command, divide the river and afford them an easy passage over it. And many were deluded by his words. However, Thaddeus did not permit them to make any advantage of this wild attempt, but sent a troop of horsemen out against them, who, falling upon them unexpectedly, slew many of them, and took many of them alive. They also took Thaddeus alive, and cut off his head, and carried it to Jerusalem, which is Jerusalem. Historically, Cuspius Thaddeus was appointed procurator by the Emperor Claudius after the death of King Agrippa I in 44 CE, so that he could keep the 17-year-old Agrippa II in Rome that we just covered. He, meaning Thaddeus, was procurator of the Roman Iudea, or Roman Judean province from 44 to 46 CE, making this beheading of Thaddeus fall within that time frame. These people didn't even do anything and probably went to the river Jordan to be immersed into the faith. Yet Josephus seems happy and giddy that they are cut down by the Romans. That's how they viewed this. As stated before, Josephus was a Herodian Pharisee that did not believe in the Messianic movement. So any notion of calling Yahusha the Messiah is senseless because he thought of this group within the Zealots to be magicians and liars, while the Sakar he saw as robbers and assassins.
This Thaddeus was most likely Thomas Judas or Thaddeus as recorded in a couple of the gospel lists of the Shilachim or apostles. Some have Yahuda or Jude and two others have Thaddeus, which is just the same person. The NT is such a historical mess, it doesn't even have a legitimate record of the list of the 12 Shilachim. In two lists, it has Thaddeus, in the other two, it has Yehuda or Jude present. They are one and the same, and we covered this in section B about the camp of Hamashiach. Another point is that the list only really has 11 people once you remember that Matthityahu was not one of the original members and he replaced the 12th man. Acts wants the reader to believe that there were two Matthews and they were both Louis or Levites, both from Cyprus. Totally ridiculous. To throw salt on the wound, the NT even gives you one other Shuliach or apostle that is only listed in one verse and is not even the same person as the other Matthityahu and only called Nathaniel or Nathaniel.
We see him in Basarah Yachanan or the Gospel of John 145. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him, of whom Musha in the Torah and the prophets did write, Yahusha of Nazareth, the son of Yusuf," or Joseph. The NT calls Hamashiach the son of Yusuf outright, and this even in the non-synoptic gospel. And this Nathaniel follows him, but is only mentioned once more in the NT after the resurrection and the designated as being Nathaniel from Galilee, which is why we know this is not the other Matthityahu that's on the list because of this second witness of who this specific character was. Basarah Yachanan, same book, 21:2. There were together Shamaun Kapha, or Simon Peter, and Thomas, called Didymus, which is Tuma, or twin, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and two other of his Talmudim. The NT in general is historically off, but Acts is especially egregious and has history entirely out of order and is purely fictional, just using real names for credibility.
This distortion of history is well recorded in Acts when you go to chapter 5 of Sefer Ma'asim or the book of Acts. When you go to verse 36, you read, "For before these days rose up Theudas," that's Thaddeus, "boasting himself to be somebody, to whom a number of men, about 400, joined themselves, who was slain. And all as many as obeyed him were scattered and brought to naught. After this man rose up Yehuda Gamala," that is Judas of Galilee, "in the days of the taxing, and drew away much people after him. He also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him, were dispersed." This taxing or census mentioned here was none other than the census that caused Yusuf and Miriam to return to Beit Lacham or Bethlehem, and how Yahusha or the Messiah was born there in the gospel narrative. This was all to fulfill prophecy.
Basarah Lucas, or the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verse 1 reads, "And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria." Cyrenius is Quirinius, however you want to say that. "And all went to be taxed, everyone into his own city. And Yusuf also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Yahuda, or Judea, to the city of Dawood, which is called Beit Lacham, or Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of Dawood." The very first emperor of Rome, Augustus, demanded everyone pay him taxes, and the census of Quirinius was a census of Yehuda, or Roman Judea, taken by Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, who was the Roman governor of Syria. And this was a well-recorded event taking place in 6 CE. The taking of the census by Quirinius, the Roman procurator for the purpose of taxation, was viewed as a sign of Roman enslavement. And this group or sect, started by the father of Manaheim we discussed earlier, called Yehuda Gamala or Judas the Galilean, was a pro-Pharisee sect that rejected the Roman rule, and specifically the taxes. This was also the year that the elder Canan or Ananias was first put in the role of high priest by the Romans. Much of the conflict on the Temple Mount was in respect to Roman taxes, which makes the Herodian exemption from taxes by way of their Roman citizenship so critical to this study. This zealot movement, described by Josephus in the 70s via his early work called Wars, informs us that this movement, started by Yehuda Gamala or Judas the Galilean, was independent of the three primary sects that we have mentioned so far, and that a focus on this innovation was the rejection of taxes by the Romans. We see this in Wars 2:8, line 118. This section is about Archelaus' ethnarchy is reduced into a Roman province, the sedition of Yehuda Gamala or Judas of Galilee, and the three sects. Under his, meaning Herod Archelaus, administration, it was that a certain Galilean whose name was Yehuda or Judas prevailed with his countrymen to revolt, and said they were cowards if they would endure to pay a tax to the Romans, and would after Elohim submit to mortal men as their masters. This man was a teacher of a peculiar sect of his own, and was not at all like the rest of those their leaders. This group were the Edomite or Idumean sect, later known as the Sicarii, and we will show it plainly before the end of this study. Remember, the Idumeans were not exempt from taxes, only the Herodians, which fostered a lot of resentment between some of those tribes within the Idumeans. Now, the date of the census proves that the account given in Sephar Lucas is mistaken, at least chronologically anyway, as we will soon show. Herod I died in 4 BCE, thus making his death after a census 10 years later totally impossible. Basarah Matthew, or the Gospel of Matthew 2, verse 15. And was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the master by the Nabi or prophet, saying, out of Egypt I have called my son. This was the NT story of Hamashiach having to stay in Misraim or Egypt until Herod I died. The text even quotes a verse from the OT that has nothing to do with anything the NT is talking about. But the point here is that Herod died so they could return home. Just in case anyone considers this to be a different Herod than Herod I, the NT paints itself into a corner in the very next verses. But when Herod was dead, behold, a malach, which is a messenger or an angel of Yahweh, appeared in a dream to Yusuf in Misraim, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother and go into the land of Yashraal, because they which sought the young child's life are dead. And he, meaning Yusuf, arose and took the young child, who is Hamashiach, and his mother, who is Miriam, and came into the land of Yashraal. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Yehuda, meaning Roman Judea, in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Notwithstanding, being warned by Elohim in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee. There is simply no way around this now. Herod I originally placed his youngest son, Antipas or Antipater, as king in control over Archelaus and Philip. This is recorded by Josephus, our primary source, in Antiquities 17:6-1. Concerning the disease that Herod fell into and the sedition which the Yehudi raised thereupon, with the punishment of the seditious. But Herod now fell into a distemper and made his will, and bequeathed his kingdom to Antipas, his youngest son, and this out of that hatred to Archelaus and Philip. Herod I later changed his mind before his death and then made his other evil son Archelaus, the one he just said he hated, he made him king. We see this in Antiquities 17:8-1 concerning Herod's death and testament or will and burial. Line 188 reads, "And now Herod altered his testament upon the alteration of his mind. For he appointed Antipas, to whom he had before left the kingdom, to be tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, and granted the kingdom to Archelaus." So he just switched it all around. He made Antipas now a governor and made Archelaus the actual king. Line 189. He also gave Gaulonitis and Trachonitis and Peneus to Philip, who was his son. Forgive my pronunciation of those cities there. But own brother to Archelaus by the name of Tetrarchy, and bequeathed Jarnina or Yarnina and Ashad and Phalasias to Salome his sister, with 500,000 drachmae of silver that was coined. So he basically, Herod I is hooking up his whole family. And the point of this is to show that Archelaus actually became king after he switched his mind. So we read in line 190, he also made provision for all the rest of his kindred, meaning his family, the Herodians, by giving them sums of money and annual revenues. Annual means yearly. And so left them all in a wealthy condition. This is why the wealthy of the region were the Herodians. Herod I saw to it personally that they had money every year forever. And Paul was a part of this royal house that we will later prove beyond a doubt. Herod Archelaus was the son of Herod I that took over after his father's death that we just saw listed in the NT. Herod I died a horrible death that included his body rotting away before his very eyes in 4 BCE. Like, I'm not going to recount the things there, but you can read Josephus. It was pretty gross. And this was 10 years before this census in 6 CE. And Herod I's death in 4 BCE is witnessed by multiple sources, and it's pretty well established date based on scholarship. These are secondary sources that attest to the date of 4 BCE for the death of Herod I. From our research, this Herod that the gospel narrative has going around killing babies in Palestine in 6 CE is easily applied to Herod Archelaus that lived from 23 BCE to 18 CE. He was ethnarch of Shamarun, which is Samaria, Yahuda, which is Judea, and Idumea, which is Edom. This included the cities of Sisera and Jaffa or Joppa, depending on your translation. This Herod ruled as the king for a decade from about 4 BCE, when his father Herod I died, to 6 CE, at the time of the census. This fits the narrative perfectly, and this is probably the historical truth. Herod Archelaus was removed by the first Roman emperor, Augustus Caesar, who ruled from 27 BCE until his death when he was replaced by Tiberius in 14 CE. Specifically for this Archelaus' violence against the Yehudi when the Judean province was formed under direct Roman rule at the time of the census of Quirinius in 6 CE. If Yahusha HaMashiach was born at this census and died after Yachanan, which is recorded from multiple versions of the text, then he would have to have been born in 6 CE and had to have died about 39 CE. This would make him exactly 33 years old. I know, I never believed it, but it appears that that particular church account was actually a kernel of truth after all. He probably was 33. The time period of Thaddeus, who was listed by Josephus as a liar and a magician that led many astray and was killed by being beheaded, was during the time period of Cuspius Fadus from 44 to 46 CE. And therefore, there is no way that Yehuda Gamala or Judas the Galilean followed after him because he was dead by at least 40 years. This is just more NT misdirection. When we continue in our granite layer source of Josephus, in his Antiquities 20:5-2, concerning Thaddeus or Theudius and the sons of Yehuda Gamala or Judas the Galilean, as also what calamity fell upon the Yehudi on the day of the Passover, or Pesach. Then came Tiberius Alexander as successor to Thaddeus. Under these procurators, that great famine happened in Yehuda, which is Roman Judea, in which Queen Helena bought corn in Egypt at a great expense and distributed it to those that were in want, as I have already related. And besides this, the sons of Yehuda Gamala, which is Judas of Galilee, were now slain. I mean of that Yehuda, or Judas, who caused the people to revolt when Cyrenius came to take an account of the estates of the Yehudi, as we have shown in a foregoing book. The names of those sons were Jacob and Shamaun, or James and Simon, whom Alexander commanded to be impaled. But now Herod, king of Chalcis, this isn't Herod I or even Archelaus, this is another guy, this is another Herod, son of Herod I, removed Yusuf, the son of Cadmus, from the high priesthood and made Ananias, son of Nebita, his successor. Tiberius Julius Alexander, not to be confused with Emperor Tiberius Caesar, was a governor and general in the Roman Empire that was from a wealthy Herodian family, or at least related to them, as he was recorded as being Yehudi, but was also a Roman citizen just like the other Herodians. He straight worked for the Romans as a day job and became the procurator of Roman Judea from 46 to 48 CE after Thaddeus under Emperor Claudius. As stated before, Cuspius Thaddeus was the procurator of Roman Judea, or the Roman Judean province, in 44 to 46 CE. So this narrows the time frame of the Great Famine to between 44 and 48 CE, which is exactly the 4-year period between the death of Herod Agrippa I in 44 CE to the death of Herod Chalcis in 48 CE. We can see that Acts done did it again. It has distorted history for no other reason, it seems, than just to kill off one Jacob and then introduce the other later. It was not a Jacob or a James who was beheaded around the time of the famine by King Herod, which we now know was the historical Herod of Chalcis. This was Thaddeus, and probably the brother of Yahusha called Jude, we discussed in section B. Yahudah, or Jude, who was also known as Thaddeus, was beheaded around 45 CE or so after the famine started, along with James, or Jacob, and Simon, or Shamaun, who were the children of Yehuda Gamala, or Judas the Galilean, that were killed by way of impalement or Roman crucifixion. Also, recall how Josephus believed that Thaddeus was a magician and a deceiver that led many astray. Again, this is total proof that Josephus did not believe in the Messianic or the Nazarene movement at all. And all instances of him calling Yahusha the Messiah are just Roman insertions, which we will continue to build on. We appreciate your time for joining us for this study, and we will break here and pick up in the next video, or the next section, part 2C, subsection 2, that will continue with Paul's first account of working with the Talmudim, or taught ones, of Yahusha, and the truth about this Stephen's martyrdom at the hands of Paul of Tarsus. As always, please feel free to provide feedback or ask questions in the comments.